I asked my coworker straight up, I said, if you left your faith today, would your father speak to you? And he looked at me and thought about it and he said, probably not.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Arroyo Podcast. We're here. It's a new year.
Happy
right?
New Year. You know, we didn't start too late. It's only February.
Yeah. We took a little bit of time off, but it's totally fine. We got through the holidays.
Well, I did have a third child.
Yeah, you had a third child.
So it's a valid excuse.
That's right. Well, I guess so.
Okay.
No, it is a valid excuse. Yeah, we're back and we have a new guest, a new member here.
Hello, hello.
Clay Carter.
Clay Carter.
Thank you.
Clayton Carter.
Okay.
As
Either one.
As the God-given name.
Either
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, we are happy that you're here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Is there a
Long-time friend of the program.
Long-time
friend of mine
subscriber.
since high school.
Yeah.
So I have two really close friends of mine here today. I got Dakota, friend since birth, and then Clayton, friend since high school.
Yeah.
So altogether, got 31 years of friendship with you, and then since I was 16, so 15 years of friendship with you.
That's about right, yeah.
A lot
Wow.
of chemistry,
That's a lot.
a lot of good stuff.
Jeez.
I'm excited though because
Yeah, I was going to ask, why is Clay here? Maybe you can talk
Yeah.
about that.
Well, one, he's just a great guy.
That's true.
I mean,
Oh,
look at
man.
him, good looking guy. Gotta
man.
get the mug up on the pod to just draw on some new viewership.
That's right.
No, but I think it'd be cool to not only have you on the podcast more regularly, hopefully, if you're open to it. But one of the things that Clay and I have been kind of talking about for a little while is just kind of the things he's been learning over the last few years, because I know you've been following Jesus for a long time now. You know, went to Bible college at Biola, even though that wasn't your major. You still studied the Bible a lot. But over the last few years, you've been kind of digging a little bit deeper into other world religions. And so I thought it would be great for us to have a conversation today about just all the sorts of other different types of religions in the world. And, you know, one of the things that kind of triggered this thought for me is even a few weeks ago, we were having our Connect class after our Sunday morning worship gathering. And we had a person towards the end of the class that basically opened up to me, you know, and to the whole class and said, you know, can you help me out? I'm confused because I have an uncle that's Jewish and believes in Judaism. I have family members that are Catholic. And then I have other family members that are from Hawaii and they worship Mother Earth. And she's like, there are all these different views and they're all conflicting one another and they all teach me different things about God. And they're like, I don't know which one's true. You know, so how do I discern that? And so Clay, I know you've been kind of looking into some different kind of worldviews and religions over the last few years. I know particularly Islam and Mormonism, but I love, maybe we could just start here in the conversation. I'd love to just hear kind of, why don't you share just with our listeners a little bit about you, your story, and then some of the things you've been learning over the last few years. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, so I'll give the not super long version of that. Became a Christian around 15. And when I was 19, I went to Biola and got a biblical studies minor. And I remember, I think I was around 19, one of my Bible classes, they taught us about other religions. And I remember probably each religion got anywhere between a day or like one class or two or like a week.
Yeah.
You know, and you kind of learn the cliff notes, you know, like the main tenets of those belief systems, some core principles, and then they might throw in a little bit of like, what's the flaws in it? And you move on. And you kind of just go, oh, I know what they believe now, and I know why it's wrong in a week. And, you know, and you try to, in that moment, you don't think there's anything wrong with that. You feel, oh, I understand it now, and I know what's wrong with it. I'm in the right. But then you kind of think through, like, imagine if you were sitting in a Muslim, you know, Quran college, right? And they were learning about Christianity, and if they gave Christianity a couple classes, would that be sufficient? No, it would not be sufficient. You would think they need a lot more time to really understand everything that we believe in, the nuances and the complications and whatnot. So when I was around 27, so I guess like 4 years ago now, one of my coworkers, I met him as a partner and I became like a weekly partner of mine a couple times a week. And he was a devout Muslim. And I've known a couple Muslims in my life, but never like closely. And so he started telling me about his beliefs. I started telling him about mine. And I realized really quickly it was more complicated than I thought.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, it's not as simple as like, they just have a wrong belief that's based on some flaw. And then I just had to tell him it and he'd know he was wrong. Like, no, like he had an answer ready for my critique. And when I thought I knew what mine was right, he had critiques for mine. And I'm like, oh, I never thought about that. And it kind of took me off guard. And that was kind of the beginning of where it all started, because I kind of realized his passion was not very different from mine.
Yeah.
And his knowledge was not very different from mine. But we had very different conclusions. So I was like, we got to get into this. And one of the major thoughts that spurred my motivation for digging into religion was, this coworker of mine was from Afghanistan, and which, most Muslims are from the Middle East or Indonesia. And I asked myself, like, with all the things about predestination and God's will, if I was born in like Saudi Arabia, for example, would I be a Christian or would I be a Muslim? And that kind of messed with my head a little bit. And I was like, you know what? What I want to do is I want to do my due diligence of when I stand before God one day in the afterlife, and he says, in case I got it wrong, why didn't you look at, other teachings about who I am, about who people say they know, who they say I am and what they say is true.
Yep.
And if my answer is, well, I thought I knew because I studied it for a week in my, 80 years of life, I don't think that's going to give me the pass, just in my heart of hearts and my conscience. So I told myself I'm going to learn it to the point where I can actually teach it. So I think once you get to the point where you can understand a religion that I could convince somebody that I actually believed it, that I could teach it to somebody. Mm-hmm. And then if I choose at that point not to believe it, I think I've done my due diligence.
Yep.
And I think I've done that with Islam, Mormonism, or a lot of them don't like being called Mormons anymore. You call them Latter-day Saints, which are Latter-day Saints. And I feel like I'm getting close to that with Catholicism, but I'm not quite there yet. It's my current obsession, but still, I'm only 6 months into that.
You're at the buffet line of just, looking at all these different worldviews and checking them out and looking into them. So let's start with the first one that you went into, and maybe we could just have a conversation about that when you kind of dove deep into Islam and you had that coworker that had those different beliefs than you. Obviously, you're still a member of Arroyo Church. You're not going to the mosque every week. So maybe let's talk about that, have a conversation. What were some of the main objections that person brought up to you, or maybe some of the main objections that you faced as you were kind of studying that religion that were hard for you? And then how did you come out on the other side of that? Still, I think maybe even being stronger in your faith from our conversations. It sounds like God actually used it to kind of be more confident in Christianity and who Jesus is. And even just to be clear, for those of you that are listening, all three of us, we're all on the same page of we believe what Jesus said in John chapter 14, when Jesus said, he said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. We all believe that. But I think what Clayton is getting at here is that there's actually a reason to believe that. It's not just something you believe blindly. And I think that's a part of maturing in a person's faith, is that you don't just believe it because it's what you grew up believing or what people told you to believe. A part of growing in your faith is actually having answers and reasons for that faith. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not a faith anymore, that it's just purely logic, right? We walk by faith and not by sight. So there's always going to be some level of mystery to our faith. But the point is that there are reasons, there are arguments, there is evidence. And so let's talk about that a little bit. What were some of the objections that kind of went against some of those evidences for you? And what did you learn from it?
So first thing, there could be 20 hours of talking about just this question right here. I mean, there's a million things with the history of a religion that's been around for 1,500 years that I could discuss. And some of it I haven't looked into in over a year, so I'd be very rusty and I'd have to go refresh myself because I'm very careful about misquoting.
Yeah.
I don't want to misrepresent. But there's two things I'll say before I talk about the issues. One is that for a practical purpose of just learning about Islam in particular, if you believe the statistics, right, there's 2 billion Christians in the world, and there's about 2 billion Muslims in the world. They're
popping out more kids than we are.
There's a lot of projections that they're going to pass Christians in population.
Yep.
And there's give or take about 8 billion people on the planet.
Yeah.
So it's fair to say, generally speaking, that if you have a good understanding of Christianity and a good understanding of Islam, you know about half of the world's religious beliefs.
Yep.
Right there. Now, obviously, there's, we could debate like, well, are those people really Christian? Are they really Muslim? Yeah, sure, but at least they're nominal. Like in name, they call themselves, and so there's an immediately a door in if you know some beliefs there.
Yep.
So it's probably debatably, if from a global perspective, one of the most important religions to learn about.
Yep.
So
it's important for us. Sorry to interrupt here. It's important for us as Christians to be able to interact with this belief system because it's so prevalent. And especially if you're listening and you live in the Bay Area, it's especially prevalent here. So I think it's important for a few reasons. Number one, if you want to learn to share your faith with people that are of this belief system, you need to kind of get into their world, enter into their world a little bit so that you could actually lovingly and effectively share your faith with them. But then also it's not just sharing your faith, but also defending your faith. This is a very real thing that is on the rise in our culture. And like you said, it doesn't show any signs of slowing down. And so we need to be able to defend our faith from it and also share our faith with people that are in it. But sorry, continue.
No worries. And then my second point to bring up before I discuss the issues is just understanding that I might have an opinion about a certain Islamic belief.
Yeah.
And it might not be representative of all Muslims.
That's right.
Muslims are not a monolith, just like Christians are not a monolith.
Yep.
For example, right? We've all had somebody come up to us and say, well, you believe this. And you go, no, that's a certain branch of Christians, I don't believe that.
Yeah.
And Muslims are no different. Now, a lot of times they'll pretend, and this is where I'll be a little critical of them, and if anyone wants to disagree with me, please, this is not even really a question. A lot of them will say, oh no, we all believe the same, or no, there's no difference because, and I'll get into that. But they have two very big different branches right off the jump, which is the Sunni and the Shiite. And that's basically level of difference equivalent to Protestant and Catholic, and so depending on which one you're talking to, you're going to find major differences in that right there. But even after that, they have multiple schools of thought that I don't remember the names of right now. If you said the names of them, I'd probably be like, oh yeah, that one. And they disagree about certain beliefs because they don't just get their beliefs just from the Quran. They also get them from the hadiths, which are different teachings from Muhammad and his followers. And sometimes they treat them as good. You follow them. And sometimes it's, no, or we do, but we are open to the idea that it's not right.
Yeah.
So I might say something today and somebody watching might be like, well, my Muslim friend doesn't believe that. That's not surprising. It's okay. I'm talking about just my experience with certain Muslims.
Sure.
And there are some who might not believe. I just want to mention that.
And do Sunnis and Shiites, haven't there been wars?
Oh yeah, yeah. So Iran is where most of the Shiites are. So there's a lot of animosity from other Middle Eastern countries towards Iran, but they're not just in Iran, but
yeah.
And then Oman has some. Anyway, there's a lot of again, we could talk about this for hours, but try to move on from that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess my would you want me to talk about my issues, or do you want me to talk about some of the tough questions?
Well, how about this? Let's start here, and I'll add a little bit in here, and then I'd love to hear what you guys think as well. I mean, obviously, the thing and that's really at the center of it all is the person of Jesus. And what's interesting is every major religion has something to say about Jesus. Jesus is either the very center of the religion or he's an important figure within the religion. And it's no different with Islam. Obviously we believe Jesus is the uncreated creator, savior of the universe. They view him as a prophet. We believe that he was crucified, died, and rose again. They don't even believe that he was crucified at all. They believe that it had only appeared that he was crucified, right? Which I think is actually, that's a point, and I don't know if that was a big point of emphasis for you in your conversations and studies, but the thing I always like to say in regards to that is even the most atheistic historians agree that Jesus was crucified. Historically speaking, from what I've seen, the real arguments aren't around did he die and was crucified. It's was he resurrected, right? That's where the arguments is, because pretty much every atheist historian will say, yeah, this man Jesus existed and was influential, and he was a teacher, but he was killed by the Romans. The debate is, did he resurrect? And so I do like to make a point of that when interacting with people that are Muslims, just because it's like, hey, you guys are the only one, the only ones pretty much that don't believe that he was crucified. So it's like, you better have a really good argument for that, if that's what you believe. So
they have an argument for that. I'll tell you too.
Yeah, let's hear it. Let's hear it.
Well, just on that point, there's I forget what surah. Surah means chapter in the Quran, their book. They'll usually refer to the chapters as surahs and the verses as ayahs. It's the Arabic words. I try to use those terms. But it basically says that God, Allah, right, who they refer to as God, made it appear that he was crucified. I think the wording is made to appear, something like that, meaning that it was, and there's a lot of debate about that wording, because then it's like, well, then God deceived, and then is God a deceiver?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of questions. There's a very tense discussion with Muslims when you bring that up. But basically, they believe that it was made to look like he was, but he was not. Yeah. And so their answer would be, well, the reason historians say that is because it was made to appear that way.
Yeah.
And God did that. Yeah. And they just kind of move on from there.
Yeah.
That's the easy answer.
Yeah.
They'll give
interesting
to that.
So, okay, let's go deeper into that though. So what is there a reason given for why God would make him only appear to be? And then they believe that, like, what happened?
Yeah,
like, did he just live and continue to
I
do
have
stuff?
heard that brought up in debates before and discussions, and I don't remember there being like a concrete, like clear answer. I think the it's almost one of those God works in mysterious ways is my assumption.
Sure. So there's not like
that there's some other purpose to why. So okay, we'll just go into some history, right? Muslims are one of, Islam is one of the three Abrahamic religions, right? Yeah. Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And the reason they're called an Abrahamic religion is they believe in the same Old Testament figures that we do, in the same historical idea of one God having a people, the Jews, all the way down to Abraham. And then right after Abraham, there's a lot of deviation. Yeah. There's a lot of changes in history and beliefs. But largely speaking, the best way to summarize the Islamic deviation and the beliefs is that they believe that the Jews and the Christians both changed a lot of what really happened and what God really did in the Bible. And that's why they believe the Bible is corrupted. So it has some truth to them, but it's also full of corruption because the Jews changed things or lied. And the Christians did as well. And so they believe the New Testament is, again, corrupted, meaning it has some truth, but also a lot of lies due to different reasons. So they would say that they've got the pure form of following God and that we have a corrupted version, and as well as the Jews. So whenever you bring up scripture, they're typically going to go, well, that's a corruption. Yeah. So it's kind of hard to make leeway, even though they believe in the same idea of one God and the same historical figures and an appreciation for a lot of the same stories, because a lot of the stories in the Quran back up the same stories in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. There will be very different details, or some will get omitted, or some will say, no, that one's true, but that one's a lie. So that's why you'll find some parallels, but you'll also find a lot of differences. And it can be very tricky to weed through that. Yeah. Unless you're familiar with it.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
What about, here's one of the big differences, and this one might get a little offensive to people, but one of the big differences between, I think, Christianity and Islam I see is, like, obviously Jesus would be like the founder of our religion, and he's perfect, he's spotless, he's holy. I mean, you read the words of Jesus, you see the actions of Jesus, and there's nobody like him in the pages of history. I mean, he stands alone in his own category. And then you go to Muhammad, and obviously there's a lot of, I think a lot of strong feelings and debate about how he lived his life. Obviously, I know a lot of people talk about his marriage life and romantic life and having relationships with girls that were like 10 or 8 years old. How did you interact with that when you were having those conversations, and how did they like go to kind of explain away that type of stuff?
Yeah, well,
because I know that I just hit like
you just tapped into definitely the number one most sensitive topic.
Yeah, it is the most sensitive
in Islam.
I know. So I really had to restrain myself. I had to restrain myself to not say something
So
And,
in terms of all my Islamic studies,
Yeah.
which are not I'm not a scholar.
yeah.
I'm just a casual guy who studied religion for like a couple years, of
Yeah.
it. Muhammad is definitely one of the weaker areas of my knowledge base. So
Yeah.
I can say, and a lot of it is like conjecture because he's an historical figure who lived 1500 years ago. So there's like,
Mhm.
I can say what I've read,
Yeah.
and then people are going to say that's not true. And I'm going to
Yeah.
say, I wasn't there. Right. So I'm very careful about discussing him, and people, and what I might say might offend people, but it's just factual. People have been killed across this country or kind of around the world in particular, not really maybe here, for criticizing Muhammad.
Yeah.
So I'm very careful about this because people, I don't know if you saw the story in Europe, I think it was in France, a satire company made some, graphic, inappropriate, pictures of Muhammad, doing like, I think some kind of sexual acts, it was very offensive. It was intended to be so. And I think some of the building got blown up and a bunch of the people, and they came out and said like, you can't
Speak of
you
Muhammad
can't speak
that
of
way.
Muhammad, the great and honorable Muhammad in this way.
Yeah. Peace be upon him.
And peace be upon. Well, they say
Yeah.
peace be upon him anytime they mention a prophet, any prophet, including
even Jesus.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yes, that was one of my major differences that I noticed really early on. So I'll take a quick turnaround here.
Yeah.
Muslims, one of the first things that appealed to me about Islam was the devotion.
Yeah.
And this is one thing I'll give props to Muslims about. There's definitely some not devout Muslims, but when I went to the mosque and I started interacting with the people there, they really were devout. They really believed what they believed. They really stuck to doing their 5 prayers a day. They would come to their Friday service to do their basically their church at the mosque, and they try to really do good in what they believe to be good. Right? I mean, we do what we believe to be good, and we try to become more like Christ. We call that sanctification. Right? They have their own process of that.
Yeah.
That they try to do, and a lot of them really stick to that, and it's admirable. And I think there's something amazing about the discipline that a lot of them have with praying that many times a day, sticking to the regulations, what's haram and what they can and can't do and whatnot, and also with the Ramadan, that month of fasting. They do some pretty hardcore religious things that are very like challenging. Yeah. That I respect. But
totally.
And that was one of the most interesting things. But then, one of the first major things I noticed was the discussion around Muhammad and Jesus was very different than what I was used to.
Yeah.
I learned quickly on that they believed in Jesus like we do. Yeah. But they would say, if you talk to a Muslim, I'd say 90-something% of my interactions would be something like this. Oh, we love Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
We love Jesus. We have to. We as Muslims, we have to love Jesus. And I'm like, oh, cool. Like, that's great to hear. Then that we have a big point of agreement here to discuss.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would quickly find, again, this is not all of them, but most of them I would ask questions about what they know about Jesus. And it would usually be a sentence or two, and then that would be it.
Yeah.
And they would know about a couple miracles that the Quran talks about that he did. And that
Probably
he was a
feeding the
prophet,
5,000
and that he helped bring the people of, was supposed to help bring the people of Israel back to the fold and correct their ways and whatnot. And then that's about it. And I'm like, okay, well, my first thought, I remember thinking this when I first looked into it, was, how can you love somebody that you don't know anything about? Like, you don't know anything about Jesus, really. Yeah. But because he's a prophet, in the Muslim faith, they're commanded to love the prophets and hold them in high respect. And so they do. They talk about him in a very high way. Mm-hmm. They treat him as a prophet, but they don't really know much about him. Versus Muhammad, most Muslims know an unbelievable amount about him, right? Yeah. All the good things he's done, all the amazing accomplishments, the great and powerful things that he did in his lifetime.
All the conquering.
That's another topic.
Oh, whoops. Sorry, I stepped on another landmine.
And
oh, man.
Even in the prayers, Muhammad's mentioned. So the prayers to God that they do, I remember that was on the first red flags, right? Because I was willing to do the prayers potentially just to get the full experience, because I was trying to look into Islam with an open heart and not a closed heart. Yeah. Because if I asked somebody to look into my faith, I'd hope they do with an open heart as well. So I tried to have an open heart. And I remember one of the first roadblocks for me to actually just saying the prayers in Arabic just to repeat them the way they do, was the mentioning of Muhammad. And they would say to me, oh, we're not praying to him, but we're, praying to God about him or mentioning him. And it just made me uncomfortable. But they mention Muhammad in their prayers.
Yeah.
Jesus is not mentioned in any prayers.
Yeah.
So if they say to you, oh, he's a prophet just like any other prophet, no.
Yeah, they don't hold him nearly as high regard.
Yeah, he's considered the great and the final prophet. Jesus is basically the equivalent to them of any other prophet that we've had in the past.
Like
Elijah,
like
a Moses and an Abraham
yeah.
and whatnot. The only tricky thing with Jesus is that they do, in the Quran, he is referred to as the Messiah still.
Yeah.
And that's one of my favorite questions to us Muslims to this
what
day.
What do we mean by that?
And I say, okay, you believe in Jesus? Yes. And I'll ask them this very simple question. So this is an encouragement to everyone out there who knows a Muslim. A very harmless question to ask is say, the Messiah of what?
Yeah.
The Messiah of what? They don't believe he died.
Mm-hmm.
They don't believe he forgave sins. Or they don't believe he died on the cross. He was
Yeah.
crucified. They don't believe he rose from the dead. They don't believe he accomplished anything outside of what a normal prophet did. So Messiah, savior of what?
Yeah.
And I never have gotten an answer. And I've even looked online. I've talked to, you'll hear something about like, of bringing the people of God, or God's people back to him. Like, so he failed because they think the Jews are not good, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And that there was corruption and that Christianity,
Totally.
I'm like, so Jesus just came and failed. And then it gets into a very interesting discussion about history and the early days after Jesus, before Muhammad came, and some will say that it was an important step of getting to Islam, was from the Judaism to Christianity but they believe that everyone who's been a follower of God has always been a Muslim. So they would call Jesus a Muslim.
Sure.
They would call Abraham a Muslim.
Yeah.
They would say that because what that means, right, is submission to God.
Yep.
And they believe that those people submitted to God and were following God. So that's where it gets really complicated when you get more into the weeds. But yeah, that's what they would say about Jesus and versus Muhammad, and the very different respect they give to Muhammad compared to anyone else.
It's good.
And then what do they question
what do you think
the Christian
Jonah?
faith on? Like on the flip side, what did you experience?
The hardest question I ever got that I now can answer, but I couldn't for a while, and I've told Josh about this, was when they start attacking the Trinity early on.
Yeah.
They attack the Trinity very early on. They say it is polytheistic.
Yeah.
They
You don't
have
believe in one
multiple
God.
gods
Yeah.
because you believe that God has three persons. It's not a concept that they're,
Yeah.
they get taught from their. Well, here's an important caveat before I get to that. American Muslims are well taught about how to deal with Christianity.
Yeah.
Because they live in a somewhat Christian country.
Sure.
Right? Versus just like if you were to go to the Middle East and meet the Christians in the Middle East, they're very well versed in Muslim beliefs because they have to be. They live in Muslim countries. So most casual Christian versus Muslim conversations are Muslim favored just off the jump, because most Christians have not interacted with Muslims much versus all Muslims in the United States have interacted with Christians before because they're surrounded by Christians in this country. So I learned this quickly, that I was underprepared when I was having these discussions, but they knew a lot about my beliefs, or at least what they've heard about my beliefs.
Yeah.
And I had heard very little about theirs and their critiques. But one of the hardest questions was always, did Abraham believe in the Trinity?
Yeah.
They would always bring this up.
Yeah.
So Old Testament, right? Did the Trinity exist? Well, we believe yes. But did they know about it? Did they know that there was that God's nature was three persons, one being?
Yeah.
I say no. Now, I've heard Christians say different answers to this. Well, yeah, there was some evidence, and I believe there was evidence of it in the Old Testament as well. But let's be honest, right? The average, follower of God in the Old Testament didn't believe in the Trinity.
Yeah.
They believed in one God, Yahweh.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they'll say something to the effect of, okay, so they didn't have to believe it then, but you have to believe it now. And then the answer back is always, well, yes, because God revealed more about himself.
Yeah.
And this is a very common discussion that will end up happening between Christians and Muslims.
Yeah.
So it's important to know
Yeah.
that this will come up and to understand
Well, and
the
this
Trinity.
gets to the whole idea of like what theologians call progressive revelation, where it's not that God has changed, but the information that we know about him has changed. We've seen more of who he is. It's not that he has changed, but just more of who he is has been revealed. And I agree with you. I think in the Old Testament, there is actually, if you look at it, I think there is a lot of evidence for the Trinity. I mean, some people argue, in Genesis where, it says, let us make God, mankind in our own image. So some people argue it's right there in Genesis. Obviously, it says the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the deep in Genesis. A lot of the prophets talk about in the new covenant how, God through his Spirit was going to, write a new law and give us a new heart of flesh instead of a heart of stone. And then, throughout the Old Testament, you have the angel of the Lord, which a lot of people point to being, Christ basically making appearances all throughout the Old Testament. But I agree with you. I think there were probably a lot of people in the Old Testament times that didn't fully see that and understand that, and they just worshiped like the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and were saved by that. Here's a news flash. Jesus hadn't yet left heaven and come to earth, so they didn't confess Jesus as Lord and believe in his resurrection because it hadn't happened yet. So God doesn't judge people in the Old Testament based off what's revealed in the new covenant, right? He judges people based off what do they do with the knowledge that they knew then, not based on what the knowledge that hadn't even been revealed yet. And so I think in the New Testament, and there are some arguments. I know that there are definitely some people that said, oh no, there were some people that definitely they're maybe more aware of who God was in the Old Testament, whether it was like people like David or Moses, that maybe they understood the triune nature of God. But I think I tend to agree with you. I think it's present in the Old Testament scriptures, but the thought of the triune nature of God as it's expressed today probably wasn't fully as understood now as it is then. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Dakota?
Yeah, I agree with all that. I would point to things like the guy at the campsite that Abraham, had I believe that stuff. I believe that Jesus was woven into these stories. But the question I guess I would ask is, when it seems like that's a talking point that they may have been taught, or like
they get taught it in the mosque.
Right, exactly. Like, hey, here's the 3 things you want to hit on with Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever bring up even if I concede that to you, we still have to deal with the fact of the words that Jesus said. Did they ever talk about those? Like when Jesus said, the Father and I are one, did they ever
yes.
want to talk about
and
that?
Jesus saying, I'm going to send my Spirit. Because, I mean, you go into the Gospel of John, obviously the Trinity is
John's
explicitly
the
taught.
least popular book.
Yeah, they don't like John.
Muslims.
It was like it was written later, it doesn't count, right?
Yeah,
Right.
well, actually, that's not true. Any of Paul's books are hated the most.
Even if you take out Paul's, that stuff, there's still these sentences
Yes.
that Jesus has said across the Gospels that you got to take on as an Islam.
But then they go back to saying it's corrupted, right?
Yes.
Well,
So it's a bit of both. So there is important. They a lot of them do still hold. A lot of them claim to know the Bible, but don't.
Yeah, exactly.
So what ends up happening is you'll say, "Oh, well, what Jesus said," and they say, "Oh, I agree with what Jesus said," and they'll often say this.
You're like, what about
and
this?
actually, and you'd be surprised. A lot of what Jesus taught in the Gospels does actually fit into Islamic beliefs.
Sure.
So it's actually less. They tend to disagree a lot less with Jesus's teachings. Like if you go in the Bible and the red lettering, right? A lot of them will say like, "Oh yeah, I'll read the red lettering, but nothing else. I just only want to see what Jesus says." But they hate Paul. Oh my gosh, they hate Paul. Because he's the one who basically
and they don't see him as a prophet, right?
Well, yeah, they think he's from Satan, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, that he's doing the devil's work.
Yeah.
Antichrist level of dislike for Paul, a lot of them.
Yeah.
And that's because and in their belief, there's a reason why. It's understandable from their point of view, right? They believe.
Can I say
Paul,
this? This is kind of
go ahead.
interesting. Paul before Christ was actually a lot like Muhammad.
Oh man,
he was a religious zealot that was willing to kill people that didn't agree with what he believed. And then Jesus appears to him, and now he's willing to die for what he believes, but isn't going to kill people for what he believes. It's very interesting because that they don't like Paul, because Paul, before Christ, I think has a lot of parallels to Muhammad, but then he turns into the person that God uses the most to expand the early church. And a lot of it is because he has this radical conversion where he just lives all out, sold out for Jesus. and is willing to sacrifice his life, not sacrifice other people's lives, but to sacrifice his life. And I think Paul's conversion is probably one of the most compelling cases for Christianity, because here you have this guy that has one of the most radical conversions ever. I mean, it's like a complete 180. He goes from like a radical religious extremist terrorist to the greatest church planter in the history of Christianity. And I think that's a really powerful testimony, because it's like, well, why would he convert to that? Why would that happen? Like, there's really no selfish motive. There was no selfish motivation for him to do that.
Well, many of them would claim that the devil is led him astray.
Yeah,
that's the answer to what, like they would, because they would agree. Why would he do that?
Yeah.
And they would say, so the reason why I mentioned Paul is because it's going to answer Dakota's question.
Sorry. That was like a rabbit trail.
Yeah. Is that they believe that Paul is the one who gave deification or God-like nature to Jesus.
Yeah, that's a later development. They would claim
that Jesus never claimed to be God.
That's right.
And so you mentioned a couple of verses. Yes. They will say a common argument, very common. In fact, it's like in the top, after the Abraham and the Trinity, this is like in the top 5 easily.
Yep.
They'll say to you, where did Jesus say he was God?
Yeah. That's right. I've heard this before. They say the exact words. Where does Jesus say, here I am, I'm God, worship me?
Right. Let's also say, where does he worship me? They also say that as well.
Yeah.
Within 5 minutes of talking to 90-something% of Muslims, that question will come up.
Yeah.
So you will go to certain verses, like when he says, the Father and I are one, and they will say, that doesn't mean that they're like one God. That just means they're like one in purpose, or one in will, or one in objective or goal, or they'll have some sort of other interpretation of
my favorite one
verses.
Is when Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. It's like, whoa. How do you get along? That's a really tough one to explain.
The one that they have a hard time with too is like when Jesus says, like, you know, as the Father is, like, I am, or when he says I am, which is like an Old Testament way of saying I am God. They typically will shy away from that one, but typically they just explain away the verses where Jesus says, because there's not too many, right, where Jesus actually says something that implies he is God, and when you show them, they just sort of.
Well, what I love about like we can go to Mark, which is like, because typically you have the Gospel of John is kind of out of all the Gospels, the one where there are the most explicit statements of Jesus saying that he's God. Mark, they're still in there, but it's just maybe not quite as explicit. But what I love to do is to go to, I'll just mention 2 places, one in Mark and then kind of a theme in John. First in Mark, it's in the 2nd chapter of Mark, where there's the paralyzed man and he can't get to Jesus, so his friends lower him through the roof. And then, Jesus says, hey, I'll forgive you of your sins. And then he says, go pick up your mat and walk. And the people in the crowd are thinking in their minds, like, who's this that thinks that they have authority to forgive sins? Only God has the authority to forgive sins. And we're told that Jesus like read their minds, that he heard what he could see what they were thinking, which only God can do. But then he says, well, I basically, he doesn't back down from it. He doubles down on that. He does have the authority to forgive sins. And then after he says, I have the authority to forgive sins, then he tells the guy to get up and walk. And in fact, kind of proving the fact that he does have authority to forgive sins. Because he's like, well, if you don't think I have the authority to forgive sins, I'm going to help this paralyzed guy get up and walk. So now you see, here is me making my authority to forgive sins authentic, because I'm literally healing a paralyzed person. So that's kind of an interesting story in Mark. I could share other stories in Mark, but the thing is yes, does Jesus say in that story, here I am, I'm God, worship me? But it's very clear, and the Jews knew this, only God could forgive sins. Jesus is forgiving the person's sins, and then he's having a paralyzed person get up and walk. What's the obvious implication of that? Jesus is God, right? And ultimately, by the way, that's why the Jews had him killed. It's because of charges of blasphemy, right? That was the whole reason why they killed him. Yeah. This isn't just a false teacher. This is a blasphemer. This man's claiming to be God. But then I love to go into the I am statements in John, where Jesus says famous statements like, I am the good shepherd, right? I am the light of the world. Okay, just a cursory reading of the Old Testament. Who's the good shepherd in the Old Testament? God, right? I mean, what's one of the most famous chapters in the whole Bible? Psalm 23. Look, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. Jesus shows up and says, I am the good shepherd, right? So, I mean, you just have to look at these statements of Jesus. I think that's what I struggle with Muslims is they're looking for an exact, specific, explicit statement of Jesus saying, I am God, worship me. And what I would, I guess, challenge them is say, okay, well, if you're looking for those exact words, you might not find those exact words. But if you read the Gospels in good faith, I think it's pretty clear that Jesus is claiming to be God. And ultimately, that's why they killed him. But anyways.
Oh, yeah, it's a good point. I think more back to Dakota's question, you typically, in all the multiple relationships I've had with Muslims, you do end up having to have that discussion about what Jesus said, because they typically will somewhat agree that Jesus' teachings matter. And a lot of their beliefs don't just come from the Quran about Jesus. They hear things from the Bible and they actually believe a lot of that stuff. And then you get to those verses like you're talking about. Yeah. And I find it to be just a necessary thing to have to get to, but it ends up being kind of like a fool's errand, because at the end of the day, they go back to the corruption point.
Yeah, they say it's
and corrupt. They say, who even wrote this?
Yeah.
We don't know who wrote this. This could be added in. You can't take it. So that ends up becoming
it's not as helpful with them.
It doesn't go where you think it will go.
And I guess maybe, and we're getting a little long here, so maybe we can wrap up. The one thing I wanted, we can go over these point of contentions and how to like make these arguments. I think you kind of called out the top three, and the one you were just getting to is the whether scripture's been changed or altered or whatever. And we can talk about how many documents that have been found and how old those documents. I mean, with the Dead Sea Scrolls and all that stuff, which I think that's a common
that's
objection, right?
I was going to bring that up next
to get into.
Yes.
But if you're okay with that, I think maybe we end here is maybe you could talk about like how should people listening approach their
Muslim
witnessing
neighbors.
They're witnessing to their Muslim neighbors. Like we can have all the weapons in our pocket 100%. Ready to go. Like, oh, you say Jesus this? Well, guess what? Jesus actually said all this stuff. But how, in your experience, what's the best way to approach this with a Muslim believer, talking so that you can share your faith with Jesus?
Great question.
Obviously, we talk about it, sharing in love, but what does that actually look like?
Yeah. So I've had a lot of trial and error with this. I've messed up a lot. I've tried to do the logic approach because they're very logical a lot of times.
Yeah.
But I found that that's important, but it's not the crucial thing. I think it's like you said, it's love. So what I found to be the best way of thinking about it is just going back to what Paul said in 1 Corinthians, which is to be all things to all people, right? He became a slave to reach the slave. He became poor to reach the poor. Not meaning he's going to change his beliefs, but he's willing to lower himself down to wherever he needs to go to reach people where they're at. And so for me, that was learning their beliefs from their teachers, right? Because the first thing you'll do is you'll go Google your favorite Christian pastor online and they'll start talking about Islam and you're like, oh, this is how I'm going to learn about it. Okay, but would you be okay with them learning about Christianity from a Muslim imam? No, you would say learn it from a Christian. Listen, so I did that. I actually tried to learn from Muslims about their beliefs. And I would go to the mosque and I would go sit through their whole service and participate in what I felt was appropriate. And then afterwards, I would talk to the imam, which is their pastor, basically, for hours. And I would ask him to explain and teach. And I was purely just trying to learn. I wanted to, before I debated or before I tried to convince, I just wanted to learn. Right? Because it's easy to go in and I have objection this, I have objection that, but I didn't really know what they truly believed fully. And I wanted to do that first. So go in with an open heart to learn is my suggestion. Number one, that's the biggest thing. Show that you actually want to learn, because I did.
Yeah.
Because I made it very clear from the beginning, every time I talked to a Muslim, if Islam was true, I would believe it.
And I think that's disarming. That's disarming to people when you are having a conversation with them about differing beliefs. If you come at it with a posture of humility and learning, it kind of takes them out of debate mode and argument mode and kind of is like, oh, this person's actually willing to have a conversation with me.
Absolutely.
That's huge.
Yeah. Being open to being wrong, right? I mean, I would go in there saying, I think I know the truth about God, but who am I? I'm just a man. I pray, I seek as best I can. I try to use my brain the best way that I know how, the wisdom that God's given me, but I'm just a man. and I don't know everything. And I don't go into a conversation acting like I do. So be open, be open-hearted, open-minded, and willing to learn their beliefs from them.
Yeah.
And hear them out fully.
Yeah.
And try to really sink into their mind, right?
Yeah, that's important.
I mean, I had to really do that because when they talk about Jesus, one of the major objections to Jesus being God was the fact that he like pooped, for example. The fact that it sounds silly to us, right?
Yeah.
But they don't think that God is capable of eating food.
Yeah.
Like that's human disgusting,
Yeah.
right? Coming out of a woman, I'll be graphic. They'll say this, coming out of a woman's vagina.
Yeah.
Like they think that's beneath God.
Yeah.
And that will be, their concept of God is different from ours.
Yeah.
And I didn't get that at first. And I had to really grasp, like they hold God in a different mindset. They have a different values they associate with him. And you really have to listen to them talk about God, about their beliefs to really grasp that there's some significant differences. And then you can talk better about those things, because if you're just going to talk past each other until you really get into their mindset about how they see God. And then I would just say be there, like show up there, right? The fact that I kept showing up to the mosque meant like a lot of them were like, man, I can't believe you're actually doing this. Like you're actually coming here. And like the imam, one time I snuck in, I didn't sneak in, but I came in like a couple minutes late and I didn't talk to anybody. I just sat in the back the whole time. And the imam, one service, gave like a whole anti-Trinity like sermon. I mean, it was like just ripping Christians basically the whole time. And I was okay. I know that might happen when I go, And afterwards he's like apologizing to me and, I didn't know you were here. I'm like, I hope you wouldn't change your sermon just because I was here. Like I want to hear what's really being taught and authentic. And I understand where you're coming from. From your point of view, we're polytheistic. Yeah. We have multiple, so you're teaching it that way as if it's bad. Just like my pastor might have problems with it. You know,
that's right.
It's not, I understand this, right? I'm not coming in here ready for war. I'm coming in humble. So be humble, go to where they go, learn from them. That would be my advice.
And even if it's not going to a mosque like you did, you kind of went all out. You know, most people might not do that. It's just maybe even, hey, you know what? I'm going to go out to lunch with a neighbor of mine that has these beliefs, and I'm going to ask them questions, you know, and just see, you know, why are these your beliefs? You know, how has this guided you in your life? I want to hear your story. I think doing that's huge. What's maybe one other one, and then I might share one or two too, and you might want to as well. Because you've had a lot of people in your life as well that have kind of come through this line of belief.
Well, the only thing I was going to say to add to that is it's just to remember, like, these aren't just like one conversation things. Like, sure, go to lunch, but go to lunch like 10 times.
Yeah, it's a journey.
It's a journey. And, you know,
could be a one-time thing like if God does a miracle.
Sure. Okay. And then you bring up the second point that I was going to bring up is that in the end, it's not your words and your might that's going to change that person's heart. It's going to be Jesus softening their heart.
That's right.
And being open to those sort of things. So as you do these things, learn and do all this stuff and just talk about your own experience, but give the outcome of whatever this is to God, because it's, in the end, he's the one who's going to change that person's heart.
That's right.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I was reading last night, 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, and Paul, he's writing to the church in Thessalonica, and he says, when I shared the gospel with you, the gospel came not just in words, but in power. Yeah. And that's the power of God. And so that's really not something that's in your control or in my control or anybody else's control. It's the power of God. And he's the one that has to do the work. And the good news is that there's power within the word of God. Like, even though a lot of Muslims believe the gospels have like corruptions in them, the bottom line is that it is the word of God and it is powerful. And like Paul says about the gospel in Romans 1:16, right? One of your favorite verses, right? It's the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew and then to the Gentile. It's like there's something just inherently powerful in the gospel and in the word of God. So like, even though they might have objections to it or questions about it, just sharing the gospel that like, hey, there's a God that loves you, that died for you, that rose again for you, that has a relationship with you, just going through like a gospel with them, like Mark or Matthew or Luke or John or whatever, like just going through that with them, like God can do a miracle. Like, yeah, there's great like opportunities for conversation and debate, and that should be had. But at the end of the day, I agree with you. God's got to do a miracle. He's got to soften the heart. And the way that happens often is through just people being faithful messengers of the gospel and of the word of God. And you don't got to be an expert to do that. So
it's good.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah. Really important, I think, to mention this is that understand that a lot of Muslims, again, this is not all of them, but a lot of them come from very culturally different backgrounds than we do. The stakes are different for them.
That's right.
So us three could leave our faith.
Yes.
And our family's not going to disown us.
And our family's not going to try to harm us.
Right.
And more than likely our families will still talk to us and come over to our house.
Yes.
It's not the case with I'm not going to say a majority, but a large percentage of Muslims. It's not that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I asked my coworkers straight up. I said, if you left your faith today, would your father speak to you? And he looked at me and thought about it. And he said, probably not. Like meaning like the rest of his life.
Wow.
Never speak to him again.
Mm-hmm.
And, in Muslim countries in particular, where they come from, it can result in your death.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So the stakes are very different. And it's important to remember that. They're not just like me and you who just reached a belief system and we believe it because we want to believe it. There's way more cultural, familial at stake for them a lot of the time. And it's important to keep your heart and mind on remembering that when you're trying to be kind to the fact that they can't just changing their belief would change everything.
Yeah.
Well, and let me end with this thought because it's something that you and I have talked about in the past. Jesus said, when it comes to false prophets, you'll know them by their fruit. And one of the things that I think is different from Christianity and Islam and a lot of other religions as well is look at the fruit of it. Now, does that mean that nobody has ever done anything negative in the name of Christ? Of course not. There's been a lot of false teachers that have used the name of Christ to do heinous things. But look at the fruit of Christ himself and look at the fruit of people that are actually in alignment with who Jesus is and what Jesus said. I think it's really good fruit. It's fruit of love and joy, peace and patience and kindness and self-control and unity. And actually within the early church, there's a diversity within the community of people that came from all these different beliefs and backgrounds, yet they loved one another and cared for one another. And then on the other side, you have, if you don't believe what I believe, you're going to get killed or you're going to be disowned. And also, our founder did some pretty heinous, violent things, probably.
Biggest difference between Christianity and Islam, I always say this, is love.
Yeah.
They don't describe God as love in Islam, to your point.
Yeah.
That is definitely the biggest. There's so many similarities.
Yeah.
But the major character / God characteristic difference is love. You don't hear Muslims talk about God in a loving way. You just don't.
Yep. Well, and I keep saying this is my last thought, and you keep saying things that are so good. I didn't even know we were going to have a conversation about this 3 days ago or 4 days ago or whatever. And I was watching a YouTube video from Nabil Qureshi. It randomly popped up. Who's passed on, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah. But he was an incredible Christian apologist, but grew up a very, very devout Muslim. And he counted the cost and, suffered for it from his family. Although I think some of his family ended up converting later on in his life to Christianity as well, I think. But he talked about the moment he converted into Christianity. And he said, I want to read the Quran and see if I can find comfort. And he was like, there was nothing that comforted me. There was nothing about God's love. There was nothing about God really caring for me. He's like, and then I read the Gospels and I realized that there's a God that loved me and wanted a relationship with me. And there were a lot of steps prior to that led to that moment of conversion. But I think to your point, it's the gospel. That's what makes it different. It's like, is it about you working your way to God through works and how good you are, or is it about him working his way towards you and his love for you? And so I hope this conversation was helpful. I really enjoyed this conversation. We were going to try to talk about other things today and do a second episode, but we talked so long today about this. We'll have to do our other episode another day, but great conversation. I hope it blessed you guys. Please not only like, but if this message blessed you, share it, hit that subscribe button, obliterate it.
And join us on Sundays at Arroyo Church as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Awesome.
We'll see you in the next one. Thanks.
God bless.